So, independent, if you're a designer or developer or maybe a project lead, we all started somewhere, and maybe that field like a long time ago, once upon a time, on a green field. And when I studied media informatics, so I was more on the developer side in the beginning, and I heard all my new colleagues talking about this greenfield projects. Maybe you heard that as well, and I was inspired and wanted to do that as well. And this was my imagination, like a free land where I could work and have fun. And at least in Germany, we call it a pony farm and ponyhof. And that's kind of what I imagined from those projects. And I was eager to start there. Even now, when I look at that picture, I see the little waterfall in the back there. So maybe it wasn't that agile in my imagination, but I imagine a dreamland where you could, like in games, just build something and have fun together. That could be just something great to start. But the reality wasn't like that. The reality was more like this one. I'm not sure if you know that picture. It's the Tower of Babel. It's an old story in the Bible saying that they wanted to build a tower reaching heaven. So that was a really high vision they had, and they started building, but then they started to have a confused language. So they stopped understanding each other, and that was also the moment where the whole project stopped. And maybe that sounds familiar to you, that projects come to nearly a stop, or like really hard to move on, and many discussions, and you feel like that's not a good way of communication. That might already start with having different words. So when designers talk, they're talking about personas and about design thinking and prototypes and the needs of the user and the pixel, and they're working in Sketch and having layers and stuff. And on the other hand, we have developers, and they're also very eager to talk, but they talk kind of a different language with different words about the CSS, the HTML, and what to do with the error codes and the API calls and some race conditions. And you already see there's no overlap. And it's getting even worse. It's not only that there's no overlap, it's also the viewpoint we have sometimes of each other. So as a developer, we might see each other like nearly scientists. I mean, we studied with a science degree, so we're really the cool guys, the cool people here. And then we have the designers, like painting a bit here and there. Okay, let's do that at the end. But also they have a kind of a view of us, sitting maybe somewhere in a garage and having screwdrivers everywhere and building PCs. And of course, they have a quite different view of themselves because they're designers, and Steve Jobs is kind of a designer. That's how they see each other. And as you can imagine, seeing the world and perceiving the world in so many different angles, there is a gap. So you have the designers, you have the developers, but it's a very hard gap in between. And as it's the title of that talk, let's see how we can bridge that gap by exploring how deep that gap is. So first, we have a kind of different agenda. So as a designer, I would like to have a screen base. That's what I design. That's what people can perceive. I want to have it look perfect. And in the best case, I would like to win a design award, of course. As a developer, I'm much more oriented on the data because that's what I have to deal with, because there's a database in the background. And I want that the functionality is there, that it works, actually. And of course, I wanted to use the latest technology, maybe also go to some conferences and see and want to try out some new cool technologies. And that's what I'm based off. And that's also what it's in my head, so about my mental model. In the end of the talk, in the question, I would really like to know how you normally bridge that gap. In my first experience, in my first job, it was PDFs. We were thrown by, and as the gap might be quite huge, you have to throw them quite high to get them across, to make many pages. So you get like 90 pages document, and then you try to make something out of it. And as the gap was so deep, it mostly ended like that. So we tried to somehow bridge it with that, but didn't work out that well. And yeah, you can see it there. So in the end, not only designer and developer weren't that satisfied with the result, also the project leads, and in the end, the users weren't satisfied. So yeah, what can we do? So now it's about what I learned in the last years, what you can do, and I would really like to see in the end what you came up with, how to bridge that gap. So what I realized to help is to first start looking in the same directions. We saw before we had kind of a different perspective of the world, but making up a vision, where do we want to go? It's like, hey, we as a team, as a whole team, that's what we want to reach. We have a vision, what our users shall do with this. And that vision could also include accessibility, like everybody should be possible or able to do that. We want to provide something to the world, and that should be accessible by everyone. So that's our vision. So now we have a shared vision, and if you're a shared vision, you're already starting, if you start walking in that direction together. So also maybe I'm a big hiking fan. So if you like to hike, this analogy will like you. So how do we go there? Yeah, if you have a vision and want to hike there, you might already see with the snow, the direct way is not going to happen. So what will you do? You see it's snow, so you will pack accordingly, I hope. So going with this ones might not bring you to the top. So first of all, we need the right equipment here. So for hiking, that would be a nice equipment. What's in our case, first, we need to have something showing us, are we going in the right direction? So we have the vision, there is that top up there. So we want to make sure when we choose a path, we already know if it's at least kind of that direction and not completely the other way. That's good to either have a feeling or even better, a measurable goal. If you want to provide something to the world, you want to see how many people are using that, how many people are actually finishing it. Is there a completion rate maybe we can look at? Is there some tests we can do and go out together? And of course, we saw the straight paths might not always be possible, so we have to choose path. There will be several paths we have to choose. We not always know it's the right path. We might know, okay, that's kind of the right direction, but maybe this is a left turn and then a right turn. And so what we want to have is to very quickly know if a way is not leading in the right direction. And that's what we often do with testing. We do a usability testing or any kind of checking the reality. Is this way going there? Can we maybe send someone going fast in that direction, see if it's the right direction? He might come back and say, hey, yeah, that's a really good path, let's go there, and we all go there. So it's kind of also exploring. You want to be fast, you don't want to have all people walking all ways to all ends. So that's one thing. And the other thing is a different viewports. So when you start walking, of course, you have to look in front of your feet. And that's what we do. That's maybe what we also do in every morning. See what's the next step. But that's not enough. If you only look at the next step, we might go into traps. So at some point, maybe every week, we need to look a bit up and see like what's around. Where are we in the context? What's our context? Where are we navigating there? Is this path going any further? And from time to time, maybe every 2 weeks or every month, we see, okay, this is the vision. You remember the vision. We wanted to go on that one mountain. And are we still, is the way we are choosing still a possible way to go there? And always checking with the reality where we are going. And not only are we checking as a team with a vision, we're also checking with each other. So we share our work in progress. Yeah? We put up the map and look like, you see that we could go either this way. I was trying that way. Maybe as a designer, I had an idea and I did a sketch and said like, look, that's how I imagine it might look like. And then I would check with the developer, would that be a possible path? Like, maybe it's just too straight up and it's not possible. Maybe there are technical restrictions. So the earlier I share what I plan, the easier and the earlier I get feedback and also can correct. And also it's, from my experience, a whole difference if a developer saw something he or she needs to implement later very early on than just having it in a ticket and not having any context about it. What shall I do? And if you already were involved early, you also feel a different kind towards the task and much more engaged. So how is the process there overall? We already said we want to achieve something for users, so we need to stay very close to those users. And we want to make sure that our perception of the world, as we saw in the beginning, might be kind of different to the reality, so we have those hypotheses. And we want to experiment very early to analyze then, is that the right path? Is that working? What do we need to adjust? And of course, there's whole things you could do there, how to check that, how to write that down. But it doesn't matter so much about that. It's more that you do it. Reality will hit you if you approach reality. Maybe it's not all the time super scientific, and maybe you have some biases still in it. But if you go out and get real feedback, that will always help you. In my experience, there was no case where we went out, checked with reality, and it was completely useless feedback. Never saw that happening. It was always something, maybe what not everything, but it still was a hint towards the right way and what to do there. So also don't spend too much time with a really high abstract analysis and checking everything, just taking the part that's important to you and go for that. And when you talk, maybe you remember that we came from another time where we were more centered in nature as well, like when we go hiking and telling each other stories. And telling a story from a tiger wouldn't look like describing a diagram and in the database relations. It's more like vivid. You would describe the tiger, how it looked at you and what you did. So that also helps in the language and the communication to talk in examples, really showing what do I mean. Also means when you're doing a reality check, a task with a user, take a video or at least some quotes from it to make it perceivable as for the developer, that he or she can really feel how the user, how the pain is when maybe that interface is so frightening that, okay, I need to do something. I start to suffer with that person. And when somebody tells you a story, you start to feel with the story. You don't start to feel with a error lock somewhere or a message that somebody told you. That's also what we need to bring, and that will also connect us because we have that shared vision and we feel for the people who want to reach there. So now more to the practical things, what you can do. You can have a style guide. So that's already a nice start to have that shared understanding of between the designer and the developer, how should that look in the end. And you can be even more helpful if you already provide CSS for it. So that makes it much easier as a developer to get how this should look like. And also from my experience, we kind of see and perceive also that differently. Some maybe just see a blue title. Somebody else will already recognize the font, and if it has sans serif or has serif, is more involved in that. So if you make it clear there, you don't have to fight over those details that one perceives and the other one is not paying attention to. You can put that to even one step further to also provide not only how it should look like, but also how it should interact. So what happens if there is a mouse over or a click? So you could already provide that information, and especially if you already jump a bit towards the other part, provide here how that should look and interact. And of course, you then can have a living style guide out of that. So there are many style guides, maybe you already know them. So one step, like the first level, maybe like we heard before, level A is to already have some kind of style, right? Like the first step you can take, but that's still something maybe static, or somebody had to document things that might be lacking. So it's even better if it's a living one, if it's the real code be shown there. And of course, there are many generators for that. You can explore depending on your language, on the tools you're using, what fits you best. So there's also a quite nice list of many generators you could use and pick from. Just for an example, I picked one to showcase what's the real benefit of having that. And the real benefit is that we now have something in common that we can talk about, because here you see the design and behind there is code. So now we already coming very, very close to bridge that. So as a designer, I could point out and say, like, look, that button on the border, I would like have a dotted border. And then the developer said, yeah, that's possible, but remember, if you put dotted lines, the dotted lines will also be here, and they will be everywhere, because we reuse the code. So you can't, if you only want a dotted line here, that's very special. Are you sure you want to do that? So then we have a common language to see if that's working. And we can go even one step further and have design systems. So that's already like going that step further, having a whole system. What I pointed out, I want to have dotted lines here, and then there are a thin line over there, and everything is like each time something new. We want to have a system, so buttons always look like a button everywhere, and that saves a lot of time, a lot of discussions, and makes the code much easier in the end. So here also find nice lists about that. But I think what even levels that up, if you have that modularity. What I mean by that, here, I hope you can see that, even when it's recorded, that you have first very little elements and then build up whole pages by it. You don't have to use that atomic analogy, but having parts that you can recombine over the whole website or application helps you a lot. Because you can reuse them, and as a designer, I know like the tool set, what I can use, what is already there, and then it saves a lot of time. Recombine then can also reuse the recombinations in all pages, for example. I can have the same header. So that's one I would recommend. It's called Pattern Lab. That's has this atomic design system really built into its core, but of course there are many others you can use. And talking of design systems, we saw now we had styling rules, we put them together in a style guide with some examples. You can extend that even more to have a component library having the code. And then the system, what really powers up that system is collaboration. And that's the last part I want to come to, that you collaborate over that system. And then you have that often called single source of truth. So you don't have design files with one truth and development reality having another truth. You only have that one. And as a designer, I would work on that. And as a developer, I will work on that. And putting things first there in a very generic way, and then building up the whole page or application with it. So that enables us to bridge that gap and have a design system with all of that. In the end, a happy project lead. I'm a project lead as well, and I can really tell you it makes me much happier if you have a single source of truth and something you can showcase and discuss and visually see. And also your users will be much happier, because then they know this is a button, it looked on the last page, it looks like this page. So I don't have to spend my mind power about that. Can hopefully happily use the website. Even more, hopefully also have accessibility built in there. So now you have that common foundation. But maybe you're working in a bigger corporation and you're wondering, okay, now of course we want to have that, but who is doing that? How does that work? We have different teams are developing different things, and are we now like building that all into one system? And then we have like a huge common shared folder somewhere, and everybody's committing to that, and we'll update. So you can run into a lot of problems if your company is a bit bigger. So what can you do there? Of course, you want to have that look and feel that is the same. So you want to have something in the middle, like a design system. And there might be some applications that integrate it completely. But there might also be some others that are using parts of it. Because the design system, especially if it has interaction, it might also come with a framework like Angular or like React. And there might be other applications that are using different frameworks, so they could use at least the CSS. And they might even build their own version of it and say, okay, the core version is Angular, but we are using React, so we provide, like, in a open manner, a React version of it. And somebody else can then also use that version. Or you might also have someone just looking at it and say, hey, we're very small, we don't need the whole system, it's just okay if you know about the font colors and the styles. And you can even do that one step further. Let's see if we can watch that video. So that's a tool built by
I'd like to show you what Style Dictionary can do for you.
You don't need the sound here, I'll explain. So here we have our dictionary. So we put all the assets, the design tokens, they call it, in one library. And we can use it not only on our website, but also from an application. So here he just changes one of those, it's mostly in a JSON format. So if he changes once and it's built in to deploy, then you already can change all the other parts of it. So that's very handy if you are in a design team and have different applications that are technology-wise completely different. You have one little kernel to specify all those assets, or as they call it, tokens. And then here you see how it builds and then completely changes the colors in all the assets and all the different parts. That's a really nice thing to have. Let's go. Right. Coming to the point where you're, as a designer, you finished your design, and now you want it handed over. And I saw quite different styles in handover. Some just throw a link, or as we saw before, a PDF at someone. And as I was also working on the developer side, it's very hard to guess how that should work, because you only have screens, you don't know so much mostly about the interaction between the screens and what shall happen with which button and how should that be. So it's not enough. So for every designer, please take that at heart. It's not enough to just provide screens. You have to hand it over and you have to enhance it with interaction. And of course, it's good to look on it together, because then it's much easier also to explain and answer questions. But if you don't have that possibility to talk about it in person or via online, you can also do that in the ticket, and you should consider the typical exceptions you have. So you might have dynamic areas, and in the design it looked quite well. There were only 4 cards, but then you have 100 cards, and then as a developer you have to deal with that. Do we then do pagination, or does it scroll? Does it scroll automatically? What do we do with it? Also, the text might be too long or too short, stuff like that. You might not have considered so much in your design, and that you should care about. And also the actions. So users will cause errors, and will have that cases. You might also have troubles with the backend with a timeout, and then you need to provide something. So that are the things you should consider during the handoff. And I'm also a big advocate for writing very, very well tickets. If you describe it well, the other one has a chance to build what you imagined and how you want to have it. And therefore, you know maybe that pattern of writing user stories. I would even suggest to enhance it with a situation, where the user is in. Is he already in the flow? What happened before? What does he desire? Put all the things you need in there, the design, the assets, everything you need. So you also try to reduce this back and forth going about when the developer starts the ticket and then he needs to ask the designer, and maybe the designer has a day off, and this will complicate a lot. And if you also write acceptance criteria, it's also easy when you check, if you have a design review at the end of the ticket, to check if all that was met. And of course, you're not alone. There's a lot of tools out there that help you. Maybe you know already some of them. Zeppelin is a very good one. Let's see if we've got a bit of time, having a final look on that one. So here you have the opportunity as a developer to already see details and get some CSS code that you can use, so you don't have to guess or measure on your own how many pixels or relative measures you have to take somewhere. So that could also bridge the gap in a tool perspective way. And of course, as we saw in the beginning, it's very important to start at least having some overlap in the language so you can communicate. That would what I really would recommend you to do, to start having overlapping skills. So as a designer, you can learn a bit of HTML and CSS. You don't have to be a pro or go very deeply in, but you will understand your developers much, much better if you know a bit about it, if you could also open the tool side of your browser and hack some CSS to see what you really want and if it's really possible to do. And on the other side, as a developer, you also can have more. Sorry about that. Let's see what caused that. Here's a resume presentation. There it's back again. I'm sorry. So also as a developer, try to reach out to understand it more, understand the users more, understand how the designers are thinking. And what you always can do together is a paper prototype. That's what the designers might do anyways, where you can also share your thoughts, what would be possible. You can point out what we saw before, what happens if the text is too long, if there are too many things. And you can have that shared vision and also share the design thinking to be already involved in that process in the beginning. So it's kind of a course. You don't have to be an expert in the end, but it will help you a lot in the communication. And as this story started with once upon a time on our green field, I really hope after the hike that you're still working happily ever after. Thank you, and I want also to thank the team. So that's the team of Interpassback. They are working in Munich in Germany, but we're a remote working company. And they're supporting that I can do those talks. So we want to thank them for being such a great team and very, very supportive. If you're looking for designer, developer area to work in, feel free to reach out. And if you want to have the slides, feel free to reach out, or they're also online. And what I would really like to know is what is your current challenge in that field. So we have now 5 minutes of Q&A, so feel free to not only ask questions, but also dig into how you are solving and bridging that gap. Thank you.